So for those of you who are here and ready to get started this morning, thank you. I see you all. Let's take a moment to clean up our space. If we have any tea or coffee that might be a little bit of a distraction, you can take a final sip or so before we start our opening centering. Today, we will use a mat, perhaps a blanket to soften the floor. You might want some yoga blocks or perhaps a chair. You might also want access to a wall. So as you consider those things and as you begin to clean and organize that set of props and preparatory instructions, considering a way to come and purify that experience. And we will start in Tadasana once again. Once you've organized your space, take a moment to find your stance. And just starting by acknowledging that you've made it here. Sunday, our third day, in such an amazing journey that started so long ago. And as you place your feet down, just take a moment to acknowledge that arrival in this present moment. Acknowledge that you individually and us collectively as a group have shown up to do this work. Exercising that discipline, which is the first step in our practice. To build that system, to build that atomic habit. And as you find your stance, just take a moment to check in with the physical body. Notice if you'd like to close your eyes to go inward and connect to those senses. Just checking in with the physical consciousness. Just noticing how the physical body is showing up. Does it feel nourished? Does it feel energized? Is there a heavy energy? Is there a light energy? Without judging, just checking in with that, noticing. And we tend to notice those tired or tense or sore places a lot of times. That's often where our attention goes first. And just also take that moment to acknowledge what feels good, what feels sweet, what feels grounded and spacious, what feels abundant. Take a moment to notice the energy body, notice perhaps how the breath is showing up in this moment. Notice where the breath resides. All these different possibilities in the respiratory apparatus, but also energetically throughout the body as the breath fuels the body through our circulatory system. Noticing if the breath might feel short or long or deep or shallow. Without judging it, just checking in with that and noticing what feels sweet about the breath, what feels abundant about the breath. And then notice the qualities of the mind. Notice the mind state that perhaps is showing up in this moment. Maybe you had a busy morning, or maybe there is this sense of calm already, something that has been built up over this consecutive sequence of days where we work on tuning in and showing up. Perhaps there is a available shortcut to that stillness. And if not, without judging, just noticing those qualities, thoughts, emotions. Notice how they're showing up. And with all this noticing, taking a moment to acknowledge that deeper innate perspective of our observer, that thing that is deeper than the superficial first thought, the rethinking, the deepening, the connection to deeper sensations, more authentic. Just cultivating a stronger relationship with that observer, noticing. And as we all join in this opening centering, just taking a moment again to acknowledge that first step that you've already taken, and perhaps a sense of joy, a sense of gratitude or bliss for coming this far in your journey as you stand, as we stand collectively. And if there's an intention that comes to your mind at this point, perhaps taking a moment to consider that intention. And perhaps breathe it in. And with this centering, we've been standing for a little while, so we have a relationship with our stance now. I want you to invite you to take a notice of where the foot meets the floor. Take a moment to notice that sensory perception of the sole of the foot and the fascia. Perhaps it's a yoga mat, a carpet, a hard floor. And just notice the softness of the fascia compared to the structure of that skeletal structure of the foot. You can consider our triangle of shape there, or perhaps our square or rectangular energies that are contained in there. And consider the variety of arches that are at work as we use the foot to claw down in ways that have points of contact, but also rebounding sources of energy in the arch. We can even think of the foot and the arch as a diaphragm of such, a thin membrane that kind of separates and also has the dexterity, has the flexibility to rise or fall. And that exists throughout arches in the foot. Consider the soleus, the ankle, right above the back of the ankle, and that name of the soleus being this second heart that pumps circulation back up against gravity, rising up. The capacity that exists there. Notice if it feels auspicious to take a slight hinge in the knee, or find the degree of hinge that works best for you, noticing if there's any locking going on there that is perhaps blocking some of these energies that we're talking about, grounding down and expanding upward. And as we travel upward, considering the energies of the leg, the upper leg above the knee on the outside, but also on the inside, and that vital source. Consider how the inner thigh muscles and those adductors lead us to the pubic bone and the pelvic floor, the base of our torso. And perhaps we can consider that another diaphragm, another membrane that has the capacity to ebb and flow and rise and fall and create aperture contractions and expansions. And just take a moment to notice as you root down and engage into all of the energies that bring your Tadasana and stance into stability, stillness, or perhaps whatever fidgets help you to get to a more stable stance. And as we travel upward, take a moment to just acknowledge the movement of the diaphragm. Consider the breath. The inhale plunges down, and the exhale rises up to lift the breath up and out. And as we continue our ascent upward in the scan, consider the traps and the scalenes of the shoulders as perhaps almost a lid on the top of the torso. The scalenes, the muscles of the throat, the traps, and then the vocal cords in the nasal passage that allows the air to flow. Allow your arms to rest at your side and extend high through the crown of the head. Let's take the left hand to the heart and the right hand to the belly, and just take 3 auspicious breaths, not over breathing and not shortening that breath, but close your eyes and just notice the expansion and contraction as you breathe. After your 3rd breath, allow your arms to rest at your side. If you'd like to reset your footprint at any point, please do. Staying in our Tadasana stance, finding stability and endurance in just a standing posture with lots of presence and attention on how we are standing. Take a few shoulder circles, nice and slow. So as you're grounding down into your stance and finding all the auspicious hinges and stability of your stance, let the shoulders rise up, reach back, fall down, reach forward, and slowly go through that in each direction once or twice. And slowly is relative, right? So what's slow to someone may be faster for someone else, but take it slow enough so that you can really perceive all of the little nuances of the movement. And then allow the arms to settle, allow the shoulders to settle, and just notice any shift that occurred after loosening up the scapula. And then reach the arms up in a gentle way so that you kind of understand where there may be that first little bit of restriction in your reach up. So we're not blowing past anything that doesn't feel like we have permission to reach up into. If we haven't reached up yet today, just taking that moment to extend upward. Notice what's happening in the spine as we reach the arms up. Notice the changes in the arch of the low back and the round of the thoracic spine as you reach the arms upward. And just keep the arms up for another breath or two as you extend and consider that change in the spine, grounding through the feet and reaching up. Notice if we are shying away from effort or work. Notice if we're overworking, and then gently allow the hands to come back down. So I want to invite the breath of joy once again for this morning. And we did this yesterday. I just want to send a reminder. We'll use the Viloma breath, the 3-part inhale. So it might sound a little bit like this. And then an exhale. And the 3 arm movements that go along with it are an inhale forward, out, and up, followed by a hinge down. Oh, wait, sorry. Before we do our hinge down, I just want to invite a little more hinging into the hips, okay? So let's just take a moment to find a supported squat. So take your hands on your thighs and just reach your hips back a little bit. Allow your arms to hold up any part of the upper body that feels like it offers more support in your hinge. And from here, just allow a little bit of a wiggle, which may be a twist, a slight side bend, or perhaps a cat-cow. This does not have to be one direction of the spine. And you might notice that the undulation can occur in a number of different ways that feel more auspicious than limiting to a lateral movement or a sagittal movement or purely a rotation. But whatever you choose, consider to make that still a clean movement. And it can still be complicated, but can it still have a purity to it? And then once again, just rise up into your Tadasana. And notice how that hinging changed the feeling of the spine, just like raising the arms up feels different in the spine. Okay, so hopefully we warmed up a little bit of that hinge ability, and that movement in the spine will feel a little bit better as we fold on the exhale for the breath of joy. But you might still consider how deep we're going into that fold on the breath of joy. So once again, I'll demonstrate it and then just invite you to start joining in, and we'll take a few rounds of this. 3-part inhale, 1-part exhale, 3 arm movements. Take 3 more rounds. Using a little bend in the knee for sure, maybe finding that last little bit of rhythm. And after your 3rd round, arriving back in Tadasana for a moment. So option to leave the arms staying at your sides, or perhaps once again, the left hand to the heart and the right hand to the belly, but close the eyes and for a moment, just notice any shift that occurred as a result of that breath practice. Perhaps it's a heartbeat. Maybe notice something different in the breath energy. Perhaps there's a little shift in the mind. Notice how you're perceiving this extended time in a standing posture early in the morning in our practice. If you're not already there, I'd like you to consider a wall for one more standing practice here. So a wall might feel nice laterally or behind you. Behind you will play a little bit with balance. So a wall behind us may require some proprioception that is already familiar. But take a moment to find Tadasana that is approximate to a wall. And then with a bend in your knees and a bend in your hips, just come to a nice shallow chair pose, reaching the arms up and sinking the hips back and down, and continue with the breath. I'm just going to set a little timer here because I'm kind of curious how long we'll go. Grounding through the feet. Hopefully we've woke up the arches. And then notice the diaphragm. Notice when the arms extend up, if that's a change. If the arms need to stay forward, that's perfectly fine. Maybe even the arm staying down, or perhaps even a support here. But staying in a little bit of fire, a little bit of tapas, a little bit of heat. Notice where it's showing up. Notice if you can find a balance of how you're engaging in this chair pose for an extended period of time. You can come out whenever it's appropriate for you, but perhaps you'll lean into a little bit more of the work in the stance, in the load-bearing limbs in this early part of the morning. And in the next 2 or 3 breaths, consider rising up and coming back to Tadasana. Take a moment to close the eyes and come inward. And once again, just notice how that feels. Maybe there's a lot different sensation in the legs. Once again, the breath, maybe even the mindset. Perhaps there's some curiosity about why we're working so hard in the morning. Maybe we have opinions about how our practice should be showing up, when, different expectations. We make a lot of physical adjustments. Perhaps the most difficult adjustment is adjusting our expectations. So here we'll play with the balance. And we're just going to come up into a one-legged balance with the front leg anywhere that is auspicious for you. I'll suggest that it probably just comes up to maybe hip height with a bent knee. It's fine to just let the toe hover over the floor, or maybe even make a small contact with the floor. But once again, see if we can reach the arms up, ground through the leg that you chose to ground initially. Notice the habit of what foot you might choose to raise, what foot you might choose to ground with, and just take a few more moments to hold your balance. And notice when the body wants to come out. Notice when our breath changes. Notice when the mind has something to say about that. And in the next 2 breaths or so, consider returning to Tadasana. And just notice how that might feel differently from one part of the body to another. We begin to prepare for the other side. Take a moment to ground. Maybe shift slightly in our center of gravity, knowing that one side is going to feel different from the other. And consider how you'd like to play with your balance, the toe, or perhaps floating the knee up to a hip height, and then perhaps the arm option. Just letting that work play out as we show up, and making those adjustments physically, energetically, mentally. And then the next breath or two, coming back to our Tadasana. Just taking a moment one more time to ground in our Tadasana stance. And just take a moment to feel content with whatever variation of work you chose, how you showed up into those postures through all of the koshas. And when you're ready, let's come down onto the mat, perhaps grabbing a blanket, keeping it close by if you want to soften the floor. And we'll come into tabletop position. And with tabletop, we'll look to bring the wrists beneath the shoulders and the knees beneath the hips. And as you begin to build the stability in tabletop position, consider how you're extending the low leg back behind you. Consider how you're extending through the cervical spine and the crown of the head. And then bring your awareness to the breath. Notice if there's an inhale and exhale that invites any type of undulation in the spine. Perhaps it's an inhale as the belly drops and the chest moves forward. And perhaps an exhale as you round. After working through your Tadasana and coming into tabletop, just allow for any movement that feels auspicious, but be curious about where our old habits are and how we may be avoiding work or perhaps over-efforting. See if you can find a balance between effort and ease. And begin to come to neutral. And from that neutral position in tabletop, take a forward lean, as much as it's comfortable for you to forward lean, but also trying to find a little bit of an edge in the strength of the arms and the abs. And then come back to neutral and just walk the hands forward an inch or two. Now, if there's any wrist sensitivity, you may want that blanket or something like a blanket that would be able to raise your wrist, your palm, the base of your wrist off the floor. But once again, lean forward a little bit and perhaps consider softening any lock in the elbow. And notice if there is some extra engagement in the core that doesn't even require a specific engagement, but just leaning forward starts to wake it up. So one more time, consider your wrist position as we return back to neutral. And we're gonna just add another balance to this by extending one arm forward. I'm starting with my left arm so that you can see a forward lean and a reach forward with the left arm, with the thumb facing up and the palm facing in as I reach forward. And then come back to the tabletop. So we're staying in that reach for a little bit of time to get a little bit of heat, leaning forward, reaching forward, but still finding balance, grounding through the other three limbs, grounding and expanding, effort and ease. Let's just take that one more time with the left arm that I started with. So whatever arm you started with, leaning forward, reaching forward, and finding that balance of effort and ease, grounding and expanding. Coming back to tabletop. Reach the right arm forward, my second arm, maybe on a different arm, but reaching it forward. And bringing it back. From tabletop, if you feel you can stay in that neutral spine, or maybe there's a cat-cow or a fidget that will help you get to something that feels neutral, just take a moment and slowly come to either a rocks or another seated position. And see if there is an ability to stack the spine upward. We'll only be here for a moment. If you'd like to place the left hand on the heart and the right hand on the belly once again, take a moment to observe how a little bit of fire, a little bit of that austerity, that tapas energy is playing out in the body. In the breath and in the mind. Okay, so we have one more move I'd like to invite. So I'm gonna place a blanket down just to soften the floor. You may or may not want to do that. It's gonna be a low lunge. I'll start by placing my right leg in front so that you can see, but you may choose to start with a different leg if that is showing up for you today in any way. So as I place the right foot down, I want to find a nice stable position for the left knee. And I'll take both hands on top of the right knee. And if that is already a little bit too much, you can always use a couple blocks and just stay here. But take a moment to consider all of the engagement in the foot that we played with Tadasana. And if the hands are on the knees, take a moment to start lifting up through the spine. Notice if you can feel that diaphragm of the pelvic floor, the respiratory diaphragm, and then all the way up, capping from the shoulders to the crown of the head. And if this is enough, we can just stay here, but I invite a small amount of rotation. And we're gonna switch the breath pattern from what we started with breath of joy to think about perhaps a 3-chambered exhale. So a normal inhale, and then perhaps a little turn of a third of an exhale, maybe a second, third, and then maybe a third, allowing for the left hip to come around, allowing for my right hip to come back, just noticing what feels auspicious in that turn and how the breath helps. It does not have to be definitive pauses between the exhales in this twist. Perhaps the right hand can even come back around to the sacrum and check in back there. And gently make your way back to center. And let's just switch to the other leg. I'm going to switch directions just so that you can see the twist a little better. We'll ground through the left foot, softening my right knee. Options for the blocks, or if we're playing with the twist, take the hands to the knee. Pull the belly in, pull the ribs in. Consider the grounding effort that allows for the expansion in the twist. Once you've grounded and settled, consider that pelvic floor, respiratory diaphragm, shoulders, crown of the head. Allowing for the breath to help us move incrementally with the exhale. So maybe a third of an exhale, second third, and a third. Allowing for the sacrum to move in this twist. And as we hold this twist, this left leg might be working quite a bit. You can always free up the arms into any other more auspicious position. Perhaps there's a hand on a block. And then once you've built that twist in, come back to neutral. And I invite you now to come and find an auspicious seat. If there's any fidgets, any tabletop or down dog required after building a little bit more of that heat in the legs, please go ahead and take that. But consider a block for beneath the bum, or maybe it's a blanket or a bolster. All those options that we explored will be here for a short meditation. So as you take your time to arrive in your seat, just notice for a moment the seat that we chose this morning, the seat that you have chosen this morning, as we all gather in our seats together collectively, studying our habits, learning new postures, playing and exploring. And I invite you to close your eyes. In whatever seat that you chose, just take a moment to see if you can ground whatever body part is on the floor. Just noticing that connection to the floor, whatever surface. Notice the grounding and the rebounding expansion upward. Noticing how we're arriving in a seat after building heat in a practice, and how that might feel a little different. And just a short revisiting of that body scan without judging it, and definitely noticing anything that feels sweet, anything that feels good, in addition to all the other things that the body or the mind focuses on. Bring your awareness to your breath. And again, I want to come back to the idea that you can acknowledge that you have each taken the step of exercising discipline, showing up day 3, the weekend workshop, and all that time that we've spent in this practice of studying yoga and studying ourselves, building on that system. Maybe it's a system of change or reinforcing an identity of self-study, contentment. And as we all gather together, sometimes in these collective experiences, we can often fall in the trap of comparing ourselves to others, whether it's body type or education level or language or communication style or physical ability. And it's easy to slip into comparisons. That's normal. But maybe we can acknowledge for a moment as we all come together and share this time, this space, the absolute beauty of our diversity and all that we would be missing as a community without all those unique variables that we come and share with courage, vulnerability, and celebration, and joy. And those experiences and perspectives that support us and strengthen us collectively. And I just want to share a quote from Brené Brown. She says, spirituality is recognizing and celebrating that we are all inextricably connected by a power greater than all of us, and that our connection to that power is grounded in compassion and love. Just remembering that yoga means union. There's the balance that we try to cultivate individually, or the way we come together collectively. And just take a moment to invite you to take your hands to your heart if you'd like. Perhaps taking a moment to recall the intention that you set at the beginning of class, or maybe a new one has come up. And with an inhale, breathing that in. And with your exhale, sending it out. I invite you to open your eyes if they are closed, lift your gaze. And welcome back. Thank you all for the practice this morning. It's my great honor to share this space with you. I'm so grateful for all of you sharing this morning with me and all of us together. So I want to give you some time for a little bio break. Let's take 7 minutes. My clock says 9:47, or let's take 8 minutes. We'll come at 5 to 10.